Okay, we are recording, Maggie. We should be good to go.
Okay. I'm seeing the attendee numbers going up, so I'm gonna give one more minute before we start. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first monthly webinar that organized by Oregon ITE in 2021. Before we jump to our presentation today, I'm going to make a few Oregon ITE announcements. The first one is we'll have an upcoming annual winter workshop. This year, this event will be virtual and will be on 2 separate days, February the 4th and the 11th. On both of the days, the time will be 12:30 to 4:30. This year, we're bringing a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Our sessions will include speakers from PBOT, ODOT, and Metro. And after each of the session days, we'll have an optional happy hour to provide virtual opportunity for the attendees to connect with each other. The registration is free and will be published on our Oregon ITE website soon. Also, our Bill Close scholarship application are open right now, and it's due February the 15th. We encourage all the students to apply for this scholarship. And today's webinar is sponsored by all of our generous sponsors. So I'd like to appreciate all of our sponsors for the continued support to Oregon ITE. Our topic for today's webinar is inclusive public engagement during the COVID-19 pandemic. We are fortunate to have 4 panelists and a moderator for today's session. The first of our panelists is Gary Leaming. He is ODOT's Public Affairs Specialist in Southern Oregon's beautiful Rogue Valley. Has been with ODOT for nearly 20 years, connecting communities to transportation projects in development and construction, including operations and incidents. Recently, ODOT loaned him out as an acting PIO to Jackson County during this past September's devastating fire, which burned much of the Talent and Phoenix, Oregon. Before joining ODOT, Gary held various television news positions from reporter to news director. He has a bachelor's degree in journalism from the University of Oregon. Our second panelist is Jessica Pickul. She's a senior program manager and partner at JLA Public Involvement. She designs thoughtful, customized outreach strategies and community-centered communications for public projects in Oregon and Southwest Washington. She brings a creative yet practical approach to gathering stakeholder input from diverse community groups through strategic facilitated discussions and storytelling that help people connect to projects, allowing for more informed input opportunities. Jessica's ideal project involves collaborating with the project team in developing a public involvement approach that builds project momentum, involves the community in meaningful ways, and ultimately supports informed stakeholders and project decisions. Our next panelist is Kelsey Lewis. She's the Deputy program manager for the City of Tualatin. She's a local government professional with 12 years of experience in city management, public engagement, and public finance. Kelsey holds a master's in public administration from Portland State University and has served in many different roles in rural and urban communities in Oregon. She's currently partnering to lead the Tualatin Moving Forward Transportation Bond Program. And our last panelist is Matt Kittelson. He's a senior engineer in Kittelson's Bend office. He's lived and worked in Central Oregon since 2010. Over that time, he's worked on a variety of transportation planning and operations studies, including updating transportation system plans for the communities of Madras, Sisters, Lapine, Redmond, and Bend. He enjoys transportation planning and the opportunity it creates to engage with our community. And our moderator today is Kendall Flint. I'm gonna have her introduce herself when we switch to her. During this session, all of the attendees can type in questions in the question box, and we'll hold our Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So with that, I'll turn the floor to Kendall to start with our presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maggie. Yes, my name is Kendall Flint. I'm with DKS Associates. I'm actually the regional lead for our community engagement and strategic planning practices. I've been working in transportation outreach for over 30 years and have basically spent the last year, like most of you, I think, adjusting to what I would call the new normal about how things are going to happen for all of us going forward. As Maggie said, we've got a great panel today, and we've had a chance to talk about some of these issues previously. So hopefully we'll be able to impart some really good things for you as we're going through this. As we all know, basically about a year ago, we got to the point where we had all these changes, and the things that we used to do in terms of creative engagement and making things happen were becoming a big no-no. Go ahead, next slide, please. And as we know, we can no longer meet with people in groups. In fact, most people don't want to leave their homes for anything other than groceries or a medical appointment. So what did we do? Most of us had to pivot, next slide, had to pivot over to doing some outreach in a different way. So once the screaming died down, we all learned things like Zoom and meetups and Microsoft Teams and 100 other things that we perhaps thought we would never do. And all those years of our parents telling us not to spend too much time in front of screens went out the window, because we pretty much have lived in front of one ever since. Next slide, please. So as we look at the different things that are out there, we've seen meetings where people can attend virtually. We've seen the use of the internet, and some of these things were happening even before COVID, where people had virtual workshops or message boards or things like that to allow them to connect. Next slide, please. But what we're finding right now is they're taking it one step further. We've actually seen people create entire environments of virtual workshops and whatnot. Next slide. We're having a little technical difficulty. I think we go, there we go. So I've seen one of these where they actually walked through an entire hall, had meetings in different rooms. So we're all kind of moving into that Ready Player One piece. Next slide, please. But we really want to talk today about what things have worked and what things have not worked. So next slide. Okay, so you may have figured out already that we did have a little technical glitch this morning, and if you've been involved in this type of outreach in the last year, I guarantee you something went right, something went wrong. And we really want to start out today with really talking about the fact that something is in fact going to go wrong, and you're going to overcome it. So I'm going to start with my good friend Gary. For your folks, what went great this year as you made the pivot, and just what went completely south, so that we can all share the pain of 2020?
Well, I guess to start out with, I'm really glad that we have the technology today so we can do this, right? Under COVID, if this happened 5, 10, even 15 years ago, I think we'd be in a different situation for sure. I don't have a great what went completely south in the last year, and I think a lot of the the proof is in the pudding as our projects come to reality. We'll probably hear some things that fell through the cracks. But you know, basically what went great for us right now is just some of that outreach through virtual open houses. And at least from the ODOT point of view, I know that JLA has helped a lot with that template. When I'm speaking about Southern Oregon and also talking to Michelle Becker in Region 2, which is basically ODOT's Willamette Valley and over on the coast. So we're relying a lot on virtual open houses these days, and the feedback that we get not only through the email back through the project leaders, but also through different surveys. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. All right, Jessica, you've been at this for a while. What went well for your folks, and what did you have a little challenge with this year or last year?
Well, when you were playing back everything that we went through in 2020, I had a little bit of a like, oh, it was wild to have to transition our engagement overnight because our projects didn't necessarily go on hold. And in fact, one of the projects that we had a real win with was with Matt Kittelson in Wickiup Junction. We had a community of folks that really enjoy going to a public open house, but there's spotty internet. We also have an aging demographic in the area, so we decided to send out a mailer that included a survey component that people could mail back in. And this is not brand new ideas here. This is, you know, go back 10 years, this was a big way that we did outreach, but it turned out that everyone was home and everyone was being inundated with online meetings and different things coming at them online, that it was really, I think, refreshing for them to get a piece of mail that they could provide feedback on. So we ended up getting, I think it was like over 300 responses for that particular mailer. And so we've been replicating that on some projects. Something that didn't go great, we have been having some successful Spanish outreach on some of our projects, but I've also got one project where it's a TSP, and we partnered with some community liaisons to hold a Spanish language focus group and offered incentives, but we were told by community members that our project at the time was just not a priority. They had a lot of other more pressing things happening to them in their immediate lives, and even though they saw value in the project, they just didn't have the time to participate. So one of the things that's been really important for us to think about is just timing and being okay with saying, we're going to put this on hold for now and come back when the timing's better.
You know, and that's absolutely right. I think we talked about that a little bit last week, that we have so much that's coming out, all this homeschooling, working from home, everything else, and then a transportation project may or may not be top of mind for that. Kelsey, what are some of the things that you experienced last year?
Yeah, a lot of the things that Jessica talked about are relevant for us too in Tualatin. I think the big thing that we learned that went great was we did kind of go back to some tools that we previously wouldn't have used as much. So we've done a lot of mailers, a lot of postcards, usually in conjunction with online surveys and online open houses, so that we can get feedback from folks in different ways. We've also done things like putting up yard signs in specific locations where we have projects happening, so that we get people's attention first, I don't know, quote unquote, in person, in the real life, real space, and then send them to a website or have them call. I mean, we've had a lot of one-on-one phone calls that before this time period would have been really unusual to get feedback where someone wanted to provide one-on-one feedback, but that's been pretty effective. It is time consuming, obviously, to have a one-on-one phone call with someone, but it's also really great way to get genuine feedback and to be able to ask follow-up questions. So as Jessica said, this isn't like renew like rocket science kind of stuff, but we've gotten a lot more feedback from postcards and print items than previously we would have, because I think people are really interested in getting mail at their own homes while they're, not leaving the house a lot. On the side of what has gone south, I think we've had a few things here and there that didn't work out very well. We had a couple. Previously, we've used door hangers, which means taking like a print item and putting it physically on someone's door. There have been a few times when that has backfired because people, particularly early in the pandemic, were pretty nervous about people coming near their house. And so I think we scared a few people. So we stopped doing that. We went, okay, we're just going to have it go straight through the mail, not come up to someone's home. So not everything print wise works, but through the mail has been working well. And then a lot, the parts that have gone south have really been making assumptions that your schedule is going to go forward according to our own, things that we can control, because clearly we found out this in the last year, there are many things happening that we can't control.
Sure.
And kind of being flexible for that and realizing sometimes it's not the right time to ask the question and you need a little bit more time to build trust.
No, that's a great point on that. So Matt, I know you've been having some of the same challenges at Kittelson. You've got projects all over. What are some of the things that have gone well for you guys this or last year, and what things have you found challenging?
Yeah, the one that Jessica cited is a really good one that we worked on over here in the La Pine area. As she said, it was a small town, and we did the mailer. We also did a webinar like this for people that wanted to hear in person. We did an online workshop for people that wanted to take time. I think the success that was highlighted there is really transferable to lots of projects, which is it's rarely one size fits all in terms of how people want to be engaged and how people want to provide feedback. So in that instance, we gave people various avenues. I say almost we scattershot. This was an April-May timeframe where we were planning this, so we were really trying every avenue. And I think that really highlighted what we all need to remember, which is that people don't necessarily want to show up at one evening for one opportunity to provide feedback. They don't necessarily want one avenue to provide feedback. People are in different stages of life and phases of life and have different commitments. So in that scenario, just a context for that, we had hosted an open house in January of last year, traditional in-person open house. People came, we had about 50 people show up. We had about 5 comment cards turned in. So that same community in a more challenging environment gave us 300 comments later on, which I think highlights really the opportunities that exist. The same vein, where an area that's been challenging. We recently did a pretty simple outreach where we did a Survey Monkey type of online survey where we wanted to get some feedback on a transit project over here, and we had an English and a Spanish version. This English version was very well received. We got lots of comments, but the Spanish version, we didn't get any. And so what that highlights to me is, again, that same theme, that what works in one scenario for one demographic type of person might not work in another. So I think we just need to continue to evolve and evaluate what works, what doesn't, and consider who we're speaking to when we're asking the questions.
Exactly. Let's go to the next question here. I think that you guys have all set this up really well in terms of, the different types of things that are out there, tools and tactics. As an example, there's been a tremendous amount of research that talks about, what type of media different socioeconomic groups look at, right? So as an example, a Spanish language newspaper is likely to be read or shared 7 to 10 times. Spanish language radio, more likely to be listened to. So there's all these different tools and channels. And I think I want to start with you, Kelsey, because I don't want to keep going in the same order. I want to give you a chance to get the good answers out first, right? But we have all these different tools, and you mentioned some of these are old school. And it's not like we're coming up with a new trick. We're looking at a toolbox and creating. So what are some of the variety of tools that you used last year that really worked well? And I wonder if you can also address their affordability and the ease of implementation.
Yeah. So as I've mentioned before, we've used a lot of postcards. So very small sized front and back, English on one side, Spanish on the other side, fully translated. Usually those have links to a website for further information or an online survey, and they also include other contact modes. So email addresses and phone numbers to contact folks. We have found certainly that there is a difference in the way that people prefer to get their questions answered. We've had a lot of folks have follow-up questions before they are willing to do an online survey. So that's an interesting thing to think about, that sometimes, as Matt mentioned, it's a good idea to have a lot of different modes so that people can engage in a way that they're comfortable with. And that might actually mean that they engage with the survey, the online survey, which is much easier and less time consuming to look through that data. But they might need a little bit of help to get there first, or might want you to go through it with them. So we've used a lot of print focused items to get people's attention. We've used yard signs. Those are pretty inexpensive now. Doing postcards to a neighborhood, the cost has gone down in the last, I don't know, 10 years. So that's a little bit more affordable now. But many of the things we're using are online. We can reach a lot of people with that. And I think showing up to meetings that are already happening, whether they're virtual or some sort of in person, is a good way to engage with groups that are already meeting and already have a level of familiarity. So lots of different modes. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Jessica, I want to ask you about that same kind of question. As someone that works for a consulting firm, right? When we do the traditional workshops, we've got 1, 2, 3, several people there. There's the setup time, the takedown time, there's cost associated with it. So since we're not doing that, with the kind of tools you're looking at, can you talk about how it gives you the ability to maybe do more things than we did before because the cost of putting on the workshop itself is not as high?
You know what, it's interesting. I think it depends a little bit on what tools you're using. So I will respond, but I think that this has been a question that JLA has been juggling with. So when we did those mailers that I referenced before, we had a lot more participation than we had with the first open house, and that's fantastic. But what it also meant was that we had over 300 open-ended handwritten responses that had to be typed up and summarized. And so I think that, I mean, that was a success. But at the same time, I think that it's not necessarily less expensive to be doing things online. So I just want to mention that. But in terms of what we're able to do with online workshops and just having a multifaceted approach, I think that one of the really great things about this chaotic time is that we're rethinking everything. And so it's really nice that with every touch point with the public, we're asking the question, are we going to get the best value for our time with this? Right. And so if we're going to do an online workshop, now we have the ability to have simultaneous interpretation happening at the same time with different language groups using the different language channels. And that's a really great opportunity that I think that in the past we might have been intimidated, and we tended to do focus groups with those community groups, but now everybody can be in the same event at the same time. And I think that the other piece is just that we recognize that we're not able to reach people in the same ways that we used to. So we're starting to ask the question of our trusted community leaders, okay, what's going to work now? How can we actually reach our community or this specific group? And so we're able to reach them more effectively rather than just running with oh, this is what we're going to do because this is how we've always worked with you. So I'm not sure if that directly answered your question, but those are a few thoughts.
I think it's an extremely good point, because it takes time to get all that data and put it together, make it into some semblance of something that can be useful. Matt, you've been doing this for quite some time, not only at Kittelson, but at previous agencies, even though that one has your name. How have your tools, what kind of things are you seeing your folks using that have been effective? What new things and what old school things have you been using?
Yeah, I think as Jessica was saying, we're constantly thinking about new ways to reach people. One thing that's been really effective and interesting on our side, I think this is happening a lot. One is just the as you pointed out before, Kendall, the virtual rooms that people have explored, that really, I think, has nice ways of creating a sense of place when you're online. The online environment also creates an opportunity to use some tools that we might have been a little bit hesitant to use before, and one in specifically is visualization and really creating 3D models that people can explore and see. It's a really great tool for transportation, because obviously we're trying to communicate in a lot of cases what an environment might look like. And there's really now tools out there that allow us to show people what those environments might look like with VR technology or with various softwares that are out there. And that's something that's even transferable as we go back to an in-person environment whenever that happens over the next period of time, where I think people's familiarity with those tools and the willingness to spend the time and energy to create those type of tools, I think is going to benefit greatly the community's understanding of the type of projects and improvements we're talking about, and can really help people not have to imagine in their mind, but just see in those 3D worlds what something might actually look like, and they can provide, I think, more meaningful feedback when they have that exposure and understanding.
That's cool. And also the affordability of those visual tools has become better. I think in the last several years, we've seen those type of sims being more easily implemented. Gary, you've been at this for a year or two, and you've probably seen some things change. What tools are you using? What do you think's really more successful this year, and what kind of new things are you looking at?
Well, I think to go along with the visualization and the virtual open houses is the use of video. Video is a really strong tool to tell your story, and that can be incorporated into a project page. It can be incorporated into a virtual open house and social media as well. And we strive to do pretty short videos, minute or so, maybe minute and a half, and that's a very useful tool to engage. And compared to when I started 20 years ago, we used to have a cable program that went on for an hour on some of the big projects we had in the Rogue Valley. And like, who's going to sit around and watch a cable channel for an hour on at home? So so many people now have phones, and we're very mobile friendly. And I think a lot of people are getting information and learning things by those mobile devices. And so that fits really well with our virtual open houses, and then virtual webinars. We haven't tried that down here yet. I know that Region 2 has, but that's something I'd like to do more of. And as was spoken to earlier, just the old school postcard that will direct you to an online open house or to a web page, or to just say, hey, we've got a project coming and there's going to be some traffic impacts. That's always helpful. And then again, depending on the project and the palettes that you're pulling from, just even simple phone calls to businesses in the corridor is helpful, to just start a database. Every door direct, the post office has, and I know y'all have used this, but the post office has this thing called Every Door Direct, for those of you that don't know that. And you can pull postal zones, postal customers, routes, that kind of thing. And it's really low cost for reaching people. And you're going to connect with people that live in the corridor versus those property owners that you might be able to just pull from the property tax rolls. Because a lot of times the property tax rolls will send your letter to somebody in Cucamonga, California, when you want to talk to somebody in Grants Pass. So those are some tools that we're using, and some additional tools that we're going to explore into the future. So yeah, use of video I think is really important.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, and I think you can look at the data. And for those of us that are using social media to get the information out, social media posts that include video, that include visuals of some form, resonate longer. And I don't know if any of you have drones. I remember back in the day, we used to have to hire a helicopter, put a camera mount on it. It was incredibly expensive. And now the 18-year-old down the street has a drone that he can do an aerial of the project area. So we're seeing a lot of things change. Let me show you some information though about some of the challenges with the digital divide. And there's some things we have to really talk about. This is going to be the next segment. While this is great, we have a very, very big digital divide in the country. This is research from Pew Research that basically takes a look at, based on income, you know, likelihood of people having access to this sort of thing. I think, you know, it's great. We're seeing it some of us with the kids at school. It's great if you've got Wi-Fi and computers at home, but low-income families tend to not have those at the same level as their more affluent partners. Next slide, please. You'll also see that this applies, yeah, there we go. This applies to people, how they use their smartphones. You know, some of us use it for everything. In low-income households, that may be the primary means of interacting with school or interacting with work or other media out there. And that puts some constraints on it. Go to the next slide, please. And the other challenge, which I don't know if those of you saw Sunday morning last week, but you know, they're talking about not only access to Wi-Fi, but also we're talking about seniors and people who may not have access to the smartphones. I have a friend who lives in Bend who still has a flip phone, and it does not text. It's just a flip phone because he refuses to change. But it's something we have to be concerned about. Next slide, please. And by the way, if anybody wants to look at this data afterwards, just send me an email. I'm happy to send you the report. So broadband, all these things, they really vary with age. So when we're talking about social equity and the idea of making sure that we're reaching all of these populations, a substantial number of the very people we're targeting do not have Wi-Fi, do not have these tools. So I want to talk a little bit about how you approach that and what tools you have used. We've talked about a few to ensure that those voices are also heard. Let's go to the next slide. The question is then, how do you approach outreach to these diverse and sometimes disadvantaged populations? In this case, Jessica, I'd like to start with you.
Sure. We're finding that some of the approaches that were working before the pandemic are still working. So our most effective engagement with the harder to reach community groups have still been by working with trusted community leaders and hosting either one-on-one calls or having focus group meetings that offer incentives for participation. We've also found that despite the fact that we're translating a lot of our postcards and materials and even our online open houses, we're not getting as much feedback on the online sources, and the best way to recruit folks has actually been through text message. And so that's actually been an area that we're hoping to expand some of our outreach in the future because it's been really productive. So that's where, I mean, it's not new, but it's proving that, like, especially when time is limited, working with folks that people feel really comfortable working with is still the best way to do it.
So for folks that don't do what we do every day, when we talk about a trusted community liaison, what does that look like? Who is that person?
Yeah, good question. So for us, it's a lot of pastors or church leaders or faith institution leaders. Sometimes it's working with a community-based organization leader, so someone who works for an organization that's providing services to that community group. We've also been working with some providers of boxed lunches or food boxes, and so those folks are known in the community and can tell us like how best to reach them.
Okay. Gary, what are your thoughts on this? What are you doing in order to make sure that your diverse populations are fully engaged?
Well, I would agree with Jessica. Those community leaders are really, really important. For instance, down here in the Phoenix Talent area, especially with the wildfires right now, the Phoenix Talent School District has a large proportion of students who are English second language. So that is definitely a tool to use to reach those disadvantaged populations. The other is, as was said earlier, just those postcards that are not only in English and also in Spanish to reach those individuals that are that live in that area. For instance, there's a very dense population that lived and continue to live in manufactured home housing. The other is our area down here, and some of our projects are very insecure food-wise. And so, and this also occurs in Region 2, where they've done mailings or a handout, if you will, that's put into food boxes, either at the school district or through some of the local food banks. And then, and I think this was broached earlier, just some yard signs, sandwich boards throughout that in some of those neighborhoods that people see. And then instead of perhaps a website, but you know, a phone number with a name people can call if they want.
Great. Matt, what are your take on that? What kind of things are you guys using?
Yeah, I think Gary and Jessica have really highlighted the key issues. You know, we've used sandwich boards at grocery stores because that's where everyone was going in the last 9 months. You're trying to find people where they are. And I think sometimes as people who are really passionate and focused on what we're doing, we think that the project is something that everyone's going to care about and people are going to seek us out to provide input because it's obviously something we spend so much time on. People must want to give us feedback on this. And that's a flawed perception in the best of circumstances. But when you have people who are really busy or aren't just as connected, I think the theme is you have to go where people are and find them on the channels that already exist and really not try to recreate the wheel on this. You know, I think we can, again, feel we're so clever that we're going to have this new avenue, but Jessica highlighted it really well. There's already groups out there that have connections, and the job is to find those groups and connect with them. And it's going to be different in every community. You know, sometimes a faith-based area might really work well. We had success in Madras with a local group, a nonprofit that had a very great connection. And actually, in some cases in that project, we had more engagement from disadvantaged populations than just the general population, which was kind of exciting that it was so successful there. But then you can take that same approach and it doesn't work somewhere else. So I think it's just reevaluating, finding out and talking to members of the community of who do you wish you heard from that you haven't heard from a lot. And usually the people involved know that answer. And then it's our job as public engagement professionals to go find ways to reach those communities.
Well said. And I think it's also interesting, and Kelsey, I want to ask you about this. It's not like you can just wake up in the morning and have these relationships with those community advocates, right? These have to be nurtured over time. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how your agency has ensured that and kind of these different approaches that you've taken to engaging these populations.
Yeah, a lot of it, we have particularly a group that is focused on Spanish speakers in Tualatin, and it's a group that we've just started working to build it in the last couple of years. And what we've started to learn is that helping groups know that we are available on a more long-term basis so that they can come and ask questions or think about things that they have questions about for us, and knowing that it's not so time-based. So, you know, our typical mode in the past had been, we're doing a project during X time frame and we want feedback from you during this period of time, and then we're gone. And I think now what we're trying to do is say, we're here, we want to build a relationship with you. If you have a question about anything, garbage service, we're going to help you figure that out so that we can build that rapport and then also be available and kind of let people know ahead of time, like, hey, we're thinking about this project that's coming up. We're letting you know about it now. We're going to be asking you about it in a couple of months. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be prepared to give that feedback, but it's just sort of a heads up that we're building a long-term relationship with you as a community. And then I think using some of our principles that really aren't any different than before the pandemic, I'd say best practices like making sure to use language that is understandable, particularly thinking about it. If you yourself have learned a foreign language, think about how it would feel to learn it, to try to read something about a transportation project, for example, in a language that's not your first. So just using, you know, for all the engineers listening, not using jargon, not using acronyms as much as possible is really important. one of the things that we've looked into is working with other kind of groups that we maybe haven't engaged with as much, but are really interested in rethinking somehow the way that we do feedback. So for example, we haven't started this yet, but we're just kind of putting our toe in to see if we can get our local high school MECHA group, which is the roughly Latino student group at the high school, and they're also at college levels groups, and see if they're interested in helping us engage with our local community. So kind of engaging with groups who have enthusiasm about getting feedback and engagement with their community, kind of trying to build those relationships long term.
Those are all great things. Some of the things we've seen, you mentioned, I think Gary mentioned, sadly we have the food banks where people are picking up food. We've also seen partnerships with Meals on Wheels, or places that are delivering food to seniors who otherwise don't have any contacts and the ability to get information out that way, using QWERTYs, using those, leveraging the various community groups. There's a lot of different things out there. I think we're going to find that we're going to need those, not just in COVID, but moving forward. It just makes for a better engagement, which brings us to our last question, and then we're going to open it up for questions to the group. And really, I think we'd all like to go, I don't know how many of us have heard, when this is over and we all go back to normal. But what we're seeing on a national level, frankly, is that there are some behaviors, some patterns that are probably not going to change. And some of us has become quite used to working from home, and there may be some other things out there. So I'd like to start with you, Matt, and really think, we know the vaccines are coming. We know that the pandemic, as we know it, is going to end. But what do you think outreach looks like in the next couple of years? Are we going to go back to as it was? What would it look like going forward? Let's start with you.
I think that we're entering a crowded space. And what I mean by that is the transportation community is not the only group that's thinking about ways to reach people in this new environment. So as we go back to a space where people have more opportunities to do things in person, they might have the attention sucks that they experienced before, I think we're going to have to expect less of people's time to give us input on projects and information that we want their feedback on. So that means a couple of things. One, the tools that we use have to be on purpose, and I say that because there's lots of tools out there, and Microsoft Teams, which we use internally, has new features all the time, and the engineer in me wants to try them all. And I think that we have to resist that urge to some extent to not just try new things. What we've heard today, that the things that might not be new might be the most effective. So I think we need to allow ourselves to come to that conclusion. And then as we do ask people questions, acknowledging that they have less time, before we used to really, I wouldn't suggest this was best practice, but we used to ask a lot of questions. I think we're going to need to narrow our questions down and have really focused questions that get at people's core values. And it's like the saying goes, the shorter question is not always the easier one. I would have wrote you a longer letter or shorter letter, but I didn't have the time. That is, I think, our environment. We're going to have to spend more time to have more complete thought about what question we're asking people. And then I do think the tools that will be useful will continue to be the things that communicate clearly and concisely. And I see that, again, in transportation, really going down the visualization realm, so that we spend less time talking to people and more time showing people and letting them think about it, and then letting them react to what they see. So there's a lot there, but I think it really makes our job a little bit more challenging going forward. I think we have to be a little bit better at communicating and doing it quickly.
Kelsey, what's your take? 2021, what are we going to do?
I think we are going to continue doing a lot of the online open houses. I think what we've discovered is the amount of effort and input that we get from a traditional in-person open house at a specific time. I think we've learned that that's just not the most effective way. There are definitely in-person things that I think we'll want to start doing again once we can, those in-person things where people are already gathering. So once we start having events again, going to those, I think we'll want to do that kind of thing. But we're going to be doing a lot of different kinds of communication. I think that the visual is an excellent mode. That's a lot more cost effective and a lot more engaging in a lot of ways. So using online, using video, particularly social media, and very, very short ones. That's something that we've all got to continue to work on. It's much more effective to have a really pithy, focused 30-second video than it is to have like a, maybe 8-minute video. So continuing to work on that, making sure that we're being concise and clear when we're communicating with folks is going to be important. And then something that we've learned for us is a new mode of doing something is translating into, for us in Tualatin, it's into Spanish, but if whatever language is most prevalent other than English in your community, I think making sure to translate things as a matter of course and not as an afterthought, and making sure that those are just part of your standard practice is really going to bring in communities who otherwise didn't feel like they were part of the whole project. So kind of doing those things. I think there's a lot to look forward to, and a lot of new things to use.
Gary, what are your thoughts moving forward?
Yeah, I think we've got a lot of colors on our palette wheel as far as tools to use, and I think it just depends on the project, right? I mean, so large enhanced projects, I think they're going to get a lot of attention still, but I think we can still use some of the tools on just paving projects, some of those just what we call preservation projects, and I think for those that are project leaders or those leaders in development, I think they need to keep that in mind, right? You can't just use the big mallet on some of these smaller projects. It doesn't make sense. So keep that in mind. The other thing I think we're going to continue to do, and hopefully we need to ask the question, depending on the project, is an in-person open house even feasible on this? Are we going to get the bang for the buck? And as we've seen in the past, it just doesn't happen, right? We plan all of this engagement, and then we get 5 or 6 people there. The other thing I think that we're really going to focus on through this year and beyond is what is that equity lens? And we've talked about that already, right? Are we hitting all the right people in our population groups or in our project area that need to know? And the unsaid today is we need to engage well, because we don't want our project to derail or be delayed or totally get shelved. So that's the end game, right? So we're trying to do our best with the engagement that we have to hit everybody so that our projects are successful.
Very, very well said. I think I'm going to end with Jessica, and I think, we've talked about equity, and I know you're going to talk about this as well looking forward, but, it used to be that thing where they was sort of, oh, did you check the box? Did we check the box? Last year definitely was a paradigm shift, I think, in the way people look at that. So I'm curious from your perspective and your firms, how do you think this is going to change in the years ahead, and what are we going to be looking at?
I think that we know that checking the box, unless you're getting really meaningful feedback or if people are actually connecting with the project, checking the box doesn't necessarily make sense or help folks feel connected to the agency or to like what you're working towards. So I think that one of the things that as we're looking at like the national news and local news, it's very clear that there's a lot of mistrust in government. And so like, I don't want to like bring this down, but I think that it's really relevant for the work that we're doing. And so I think that for me and for the projects that I'm working on, I want to make sure that we're intentionally building in time to review how we're reaching the public, what our messaging is, with a few trusted folks to make sure that it's balanced messaging and it doesn't appear biased and that it's culturally appropriate. And that takes time because it means that you have to be willing to change it if you get feedback that says that your questions are biased. But I think that people will see that and they'll be more willing to participate if the way we're talking to them actually communicates well with them. So I'll just leave that parting thought.
Quick show of hands. How many of you have been to a meeting where the public participated? They said, I don't know why you're having a meeting. You already know what you're going to do, and my position is irrelevant. Anybody? Yeah. So I think that's something we all have to work on. I mean, clearly that is a challenge. And the thing is that now we've got, I would say, we're been forced to use a more diverse toolbox. So we've got the phones, we've got the postcards, we've got the virtual meetings, we've got all these other connection points in places. So it's going to be an interesting year, no doubt. And what I'd like to do now is if folks that are participating in the webinar have questions, now's the time to type them in. You can use the chat function or you can use the questions. I'm not sure which one of these. I'm looking at both of them here. But if you have any additional questions for our panelists, so I'd just like to thank everybody. Did great and has so much information that I think can be really useful to all of us moving forward. So if anyone has any questions, go ahead and type those in.
Kendall, are you able to see the questions that have come in through the meeting?
I am not.
Okay, let me assign them to you and they should pop up.
Oh, here we go. I see a question for Michael Williams. What tools do you use to ensure messages reaching socioeconomic groups throughout the community and that the opportunity for engagement is equitable? Do you survey respondents based on their socioeconomic groups? Jessica, let me start with you on that. So I think the idea is once you've got the input that came in, are you correlating the comments and the people who made them with the variety of the socioeconomic groups that you're trying to reach? I'm not hearing you.
Yeah. We are doing that, and we're still falling short. To just to be real, we're still falling short. A lot of the folks that we're reaching still tend to be wealthier, more educated community members, and so while we're trying to make sure that we're asking the demographics questions and we're providing a more multifaceted outreach approach, we are still, now it just seems like we're reaching a wider group of the same type of people. So we know that we need to do better and go deeper.
Great. I'm going to ask Lisa on this one and then go to Gary. Can you share strategies for combining outreach across agencies and projects to decrease burdens on the community? And I think what they're saying here is that I'm a member of the public. I'm going to hear from transportation. I may be hearing from law enforcement. I may be hearing from planning. How do you make sure that they're not completely overburdened with the different asks for their time in terms of outreach? And Kelsey, let me start with you on that.
Okay. So in Tualatin, we have community engagement organizations. We call them CIOs, and they're essentially neighborhood groups. What we've done for those meetings is have them set their own agenda, and we will ask, we would like to talk to you about this. Can we come to you? And they can say yes, and they can say no. And sometimes they say no. That's not a high enough priority for us right now. And so as scary as that sounds, it's really important to put it in the groups that you're meeting with, put it in their own hands and give them the choice to tell you whether they want to talk, whether they want to hear from you right now or some other group. And the feedback we've gotten on that has ranged quite a bit. So I think it's an important question to ask.
Gary, how about you?
Well, if I understand the question correctly, typically we're already engaged with either the city or law enforcement on a project. We're all kind of working toward the same goal. If it is a impactful project, and for instance, if it's like a pavement preservation project or something like that, we do reach out to not only the communities, but also law enforcement, fire, ambulance, just to get their read as we go along on any kind of impacts, and do they see any issues with them. A lot of concern about our projects right now over fire and evacuation routes. We have a project south of Ashland that closed ramps at what we call exit 6, which is the Mount Ashland exit. And so with the increased awareness of fire danger, we were hearing from a lot of people on, will we be able to evacuate if there's a fire? Can we go through the construction zone? So we had to talk about that and bring in Department of Forestry and Forest Service on that too. So yeah, so we're talking to those partners, and those partnerships are really, really important for the success of your project.
I think for those that have the opportunity, if you have a project coming through and the city or the county has a public information officer or either city administration, it's really important to find out what other initiatives are happening within that community at the same time, and work collaboratively, because we have seen instances, for example, where we might have an open house thing with the different rooms that have different conversations happening in different places where people can freely move between. So it's really important to have that coordination. One of the other questions out here was, how are we consulting with communities of color representatives before building tools for their community? So Matt, I'm going to ask you and then pop over to Jessica on that. But I think the question is, if you're going to develop an outreach program for either Hispanic or Native American or African American people, are you talking to representatives of that community first to vet the information and vet the materials before you take them out there?
Yeah, I think you have to, and I think Jessica or Kelsey one talked about this before, where you need to really, in these circumstances, not assume that people are going to come to you with their information. We had success on the City of Bend project where we did workshops around the community, but then we did a specific workshop with the disadvantaged groups where the city already had relationships, and we had a specific workshop that was outside of these other city workshops that were really based on a region of the city. And what we did is we created an environment where people could specifically hear and then share in an environment that was focused on them and their input and feedback. And what I think that did is we got feedback we wouldn't have otherwise heard. We had a situation where we asked specifically a group of people that, again, the city had a relationship with, what they thought and what their concerns were. And we heard some really great stuff. We heard about sidewalk connections that were really important because of a particular location that was important in places that people are trying to go. So I think you have to create environments where you sit down with people, whether it be through a workshop or as Kelsey said, those more time-consuming but important one-on-one conversations. I think we just need to allow ourselves the time and effort to do that going forward, to really hear from people we need to hear from.
And Jessica, I wonder if you can elaborate on that a little bit further, and also talk about, how do you find these people? I mean, it's not like they come knocking on your door. How do you find the right people to make that connection?
Yeah. Well, so as a consultant, a lot of times we start with asking the agency who they're currently working with, because a lot of agencies already have those built-in relationships, ideally. And so they already have the traction and we don't have to start from square one, and that's great. If not, then it's a lot of like picking up the phone and calling different community organizations and talking through what the project is, what we want, how we want to involve the public, and asking them then and there, like, how can we involve you with this project and how does it make sense? Should we be doing periodic meetings or should it be written updates? Like, how should we keep you informed or involved? I think that that has been, it's ideal when we start a project with an agency that has built-in relationships with the community groups, and that's actually where I've found the most traction, because we already have some trust with the agency. It's really hard as a consultant to come in because my contracts are so quick, and the relationship shouldn't frankly be with the consultant, it should be with the agency. And so making sure that we are designing whatever outreach effort we're doing with that trusted community leader is really important. So working with them to design the agenda or work through the communications, make sure that the questions are appropriate. And I really just try to support them so they can run the conversation and make sure that they have the information to be able to facilitate the discussion. I think that the other little piece that I just want to plug in here too is that it requires flexibility with contracts. So a lot of times consulting contracts say you need to do an online open house, but maybe we're hearing from the community groups that that's not actually going to be effective. And so I'm hoping that that's one positive thing that might come out of all of this, is that we build in a little bit more flexibility into how we're doing outreach with communities of color.
You know, that's a great point. And I think what's also really interesting is that, you know, as time marches on, I think we have to be conscious about the demographics of the communities and where the projects are. We have to be conscious about where people find connections in those communities and then develop those relationships over the long term. And you're right, that really does fall to the local agencies, but as practitioners, it also falls to us to help them make those connections and maintain them and develop that trust. I see now that we're just slightly over noon. I don't want to be respectful of everyone's time, but I do want to thank all the panelists. Again, I think it was a really robust discussion. And Maggie, I don't know if I'm tossing this back to you or to Carl, but again, thank you all for your participation and your brilliant comments on this exciting topic. Carl, are you there?
It was fun.
It was fun.
Yep. So, yeah, Maggie, do you have any closing thoughts?
Well, I just want to say thank you to every one of our presenters today. And thank you for attending our webinar. Hope everyone have a good afternoon.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you. Be well.
Thank you.
Bye.